What if I told you that, once upon a time, we weren't the only humans on Earth? That there were others, just as intelligent as we are, living side by side, hunting, raising families, and leaving their mark on the world. Have you ever stopped to think what it would be like to look into the eyes of another kind of human and realize they're not you, but they're not just any animal either? Because this story really happened. For millions of years, different human species shared the planet. But around 40,000 years ago, everything changed. The last Neanderthals disappeared, and we were left alone. The question is, was this simply the work of fate, or did we have something to do with it? Today, we are going to travel back in time to discover what life was like for these relatives of ours, uncover what might have really happened to them, and perhaps realize that their story still has a lot to say about our future. When we think of humans, it's natural to picture only our own species. But the truth is, for a very long time, we weren't alone. Neanderthals, for example, were not the primitive creatures many imagine them to be. They inhabited vast regions of Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, enduring harsh winters, hunting large animals, and maintaining complex communities. They weren't passing visitors. They were an integral part of the planet's natural balance. But around 40,000 years ago, something happened. Slowly, their presence began to vanish from the archaeological record. Tools stopped being produced, caves stood empty, and traces of their existence became rare. And it was precisely at this time that Homo sapiens, our species, arrived and began spreading across the territories that once belonged to them. Scientists still debate whether we were directly responsible for their extinction. Some believe that competition for food and territory was enough to push Neanderthals to the brink. Others suggest that severe climate changes drastically reduced their chances of survival. There are also darker theories, speaking of possible direct conflicts, ambushes, violent disputes, and even massacres. What's most intriguing is that after the Neanderthals disappeared, we were alone on the planet. For the first time in millions of years, only one human species walked the Earth. And this exclusivity, which today feels natural, was actually the result of a chain of events we may never fully understand. The question that remains is, was our victory inevitable, or simply the product of circumstances that could have turned out differently? Before we can understand our connection to the Neanderthals, we need to remember where we fit into the tree of life. Biology places us within a vast family of living beings, and each branch of that tree tells part of our story. We, Homo sapiens, belong to the kingdom Animalia, the phylum Chordata, the class Mammalia, and the order Primates. Up to this point, we still share much with many other creatures. But as we go further, we arrive at the family Hominidae, the great apes, where we find our closest relatives, chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. Within this family, there is a special genus, Homo. It includes not only our species but also other humans who once walked the Earth, such as the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and the enigmatic Homo floresiensis. They weren't pre-humans, as is often assumed, but rather different versions of what it means to be human. Each species had its own characteristics, cultures, and ways of adapting to the world. The emergence of the genus Homo during the Paleolithic period was an evolutionary milestone. We didn't just develop larger brains, we also gained more complex social skills, the ability to plan far into the future, and the capacity to shape our environment to our advantage. This progress didn't happen in isolation. Other human species evolved in parallel, sharing land, hunting grounds, and, in some cases, even genetic ties with us. When we put this classification into perspective, we notice something striking. The line separating us from the Neanderthals is extremely thin. Biologically, they were as human as we are, and the division into different species is more of a technical distinction than an absolute barrier. Long before us, other humans were already shaping the world around them with ingenuity. The earliest evidence of stone tools dates back about 3.3 million years, long before the appearance of Homo sapiens. These carefully crafted pieces were more than simple objects. They were a sign that the human mind, in its many forms, already had the ability to plan, create, and transform. For the first members of the genus Homo, making tools wasn't a luxury, it was a matter of survival. A sharp blade could mean meat for the winter. A stone axe could split bones to reach the nutrient-rich marrow inside. Over time, mastering these techniques not only made hunting and gathering easier but also shaped the human body itself. More skillful hands, more complex brains, and more sophisticated communication to teach and learn new skills. Fire was another game changer. It brought warmth, protection from predators, and the ability to cook food, making digestion more efficient and freeing up energy for brain growth. It also became a social gathering point, where stories could be shared and hunting plans discussed. Among the Neanderthals, toolmaking reached an impressive level. They produced long, sharp blades, scrapers for working hides, and spear tips capable of bringing down large animals. This technical skill proves that intelligence was not exclusive to Homo sapiens. The difference may have been in the speed of innovation and the ability to pass knowledge on to increasingly larger groups. These silent, seemingly simple tools carry within them the very beginning of our technological history. Looking at them is like witnessing the first spark of something that would define the entire future of humanity. Our history is not a straight line, but a tangled web of paths that intersect and sometimes vanish into the past. It all begins with Homo habilis, about 2.4 million years ago, the skilled human who mastered simple stone tools. Then came Homo ergaster, with a body more similar to ours and the ability to craft more refined instruments. Homo erectus, in turn, was a true pioneer. They left Africa, spread to other continents, and learned to control fire. Then there was the enigmatic Homo antecessor, found in Europe, who may have been a common ancestor of both us and the Neanderthals. Later emerged Homo heidelbergensis, a skilled hunter and builder of robust tools, who gave rise to Neanderthals in Europe and Homo sapiens in Africa. Meanwhile, a mysterious lineage flourished in Asia, the Denisovans. Known only from fragments of bones and teeth, they left a genetic legacy still present in some modern populations. And on the islands of Indonesia appeared Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit for their small stature, who survived until surprisingly recent times. For thousands of years, many of these species coexisted, sharing territories and resources. In some regions, they may have met, exchanged hunting techniques, and even genes. But little by little, these other humans disappeared, leaving Homo sapiens as the last representative of the genus Homo. This timeline reminds us of something essential. Our survival was never guaranteed. It was the result of encounters, adaptations, and perhaps unique circumstances that could just as easily have favored another species in our place. When different species occupy the same territories and depend on similar resources, coexistence can become fragile. It's possible that this is exactly what happened between us, Homo sapiens, and the Neanderthals. Both species hunted large animals, gathered fruits and roots, and sought out strategic shelters. But as Homo sapiens expanded across Europe and Asia, competition for these vital resources for survival may have intensified. Archaeological evidence suggests that, in some places, this competition was not peaceful. Bones bearing injury marks, spear tips, and signs of violence indicate that direct confrontations may have occurred. Even without declared wars, the mere presence of a more numerous and adaptable species could have placed enormous pressure on the Neanderthals. Social organization may also have been a decisive factor. Homo sapiens appear to have developed broader communication networks and systems of exchange between distant groups. This allowed for the sharing of food, technologies, and information, giving us a strategic advantage during times of scarcity. Neanderthals, although intelligent and skilled, likely lived in smaller, more isolated groups, making them more vulnerable to environmental changes and resource shortages. Some scientists also point to the possibility of diseases spreading between species. Viruses and bacteria to which one population had no immunity could wipe out entire communities in just a few generations. In the end, there may not have been a single fatal blow, but rather a combination of environmental, social, and even biological pressures that, together, pushed the Neanderthals toward extinction. What remains uncertain is whether this competition was inevitable, or if there might have been room for more than one human species to thrive on the same planet. Neanderthals are often portrayed as brutish and clumsy, but that image couldn't be further from the truth. Physically, they were robust, with dense muscles and strong bones, adapted to withstand the intense cold of the Ice Age. Their skulls were broad, with prominent brow ridges, and their brains were, on average, as large as, or even larger than, ours. This physical structure was not a sign of inferiority, but an adaptation to an extreme environment where strength and endurance were just as vital as intelligence. Culturally, Neanderthals are surprising. They crafted refined stone tools, such as blades and scrapers, and used complex techniques to hunt large animals. Evidence shows they cooked their food, controlled fire, and worked animal hides to protect themselves from a cold. More than that, there are clear signs they possessed symbolic thinking, decorated bones, necklaces made from teeth and claws, and the use of pigments to color objects, and possibly their own bodies. Funerary rituals have also been identified. In some archaeological sites, skeletons have been found in careful positions, accompanied by tools and personal objects. This suggests that, like us, they recognized the significance of death and perhaps even believed in some form of life after it. All of this indicates that, far from being mere survivors of nature, Neanderthals were creators, inventors, and, above all, human beings in the deepest sense of the word. The true difference between them and us may not have been intelligence itself, but how that intelligence was used to adapt and innovate in a constantly changing world. The story between us and the Neanderthals isn't made up solely of competition and distance. It also involves closeness and intimacy. Genetic research has revealed a surprising fact. All modern humans outside of Africa carry, on average, between 1% and 3% Neanderthal DNA. This means that, at some point, our species not only met but formed deeper bonds, creating families and leaving descendants. This mixing wasn't a single, isolated event. Evidence suggests that over thousands of years, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals lived alongside one another in various regions, and relationships between them happened repeatedly. This also implies that the cultural or biological barriers between the species were smaller than we once imagined. In other words, from a biological standpoint, they were human enough for reproduction to be both possible and fertile. The Neanderthal DNA we carry still influences our lives today. Some inherited genes affect the immune system, helping our ancestors adapt to diseases and colder climates. Others are linked to physical traits such as hair type and skin color. There are even studies connecting Neanderthal genetic heritage to predispositions for certain modern health conditions. These discoveries challenge the idea that we were absolute enemies. On the contrary, they show that, in the midst of the struggle for survival, there was also cooperation, the exchange of knowledge, and family bonds. Part of who we are today is, quite literally, the result of them. And perhaps, in a way, the Neanderthals never truly disappeared. They live within each of us, hidden in our genes, telling a story that goes far beyond extinction. The extinction of the Neanderthals wasn't caused by a single sudden event, but most likely by a complex combination of factors that, together, became unsustainable for their survival. One of the most significant was climate change. During their time, Europe went through intense temperature swings, with severe ice ages and brief warmer periods. These shifts drastically altered the environment, reducing the availability of game and vegetation. Another blow came with the disappearance of the megafauna, animals like mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and giant bison, which were a fundamental part of the Neanderthal diet and hunting culture. Without these large prey animals, they were forced to compete even more with Homo sapiens for smaller and scarcer food sources. There's also the matter of indirect competition. Even without constant conflict, the simple expansion of Homo sapiens into territories once occupied by Neanderthals meant less space, fewer resources, and greater pressure on their communities. Our more adaptable way of life, along with broader social networks, may have given us the edge during moments of crisis. And, interestingly, we ourselves were not immune to risk. There is evidence that Homo sapiens nearly disappeared from Europe during certain periods of extreme cold. This reinforces the idea that the environment was becoming increasingly hostile for any human species. In the end, the Neanderthals faded away gradually, not like a flame suddenly extinguished, but like a fire slowly losing strength until only ashes remained. And in those ashes, the question still lingers. If the climate had been more stable, if competition had been less intense, would the world today be shared by more than one human species? When we look back and remember the Neanderthals, we should not see them as defeated rivals, but as part of our own story. The question that remains is, will we learn from the past and find ways to coexist with the world around us, or will we repeat, on another scale, the same mistakes that once erased our closest relatives from the map?